We are breaking the silence, and you are breaking the silence, and I really appreciate you being here. I really do. That was a rough one. The last week's show, um, it resulted after I finished it, and I had a couple of days of panic attacks. I had another one this morning. I've never had them before. They're quite unsettling because you feel like you're having cardio issues, but that's not what it was. And I don't know why all of a sudden I'm getting them. Mary thinks it's because I subjected myself to reliving that story over and over again in the edit bay. And it was really a hard one, and I'm glad to be past it. But, working in this field as I do and having the experiences both, I guess it's no wonder that my physiological self and my spiritual self are reacting in the way it has. I feel fine right now. It passed quickly this morning. I'm really glad for that. Enough of that. I noticed that particular show did not get a lot of views, whereas My Mother's Secret got over 40,000 views in almost the same amount of time. Well, not quite, but it didn't even reach 2,000. I think Mary said I scared the hell out of people, and maybe I did. I don't know, but over time it will. Thanks to Jill Burnhouse, we just love her. She's our really wonderful new friend that we met last year at a film festival, and she's really been helping breaking the silence, and you should give her a lot of credit. She's been right there for us, helping us. But today I met one of her best friend, who is this incredible artist and actress and writer. And when I saw her sizzle reel of for her acting that she uses with her agent and to get work in Hollywood, which she does, I literally thought at first I've seen Kathy Bates. I mean, she has that level of presence and ability, and just amazing actor. And we call everybody actors now, not actresses and actors. So I'm just saying it like it is. But and she actually agreed to do one of our films, one of our short films, which means that I'm going to be writing a script very soon. And the script's going to be about you, about how this affects your life, about how judgmental people are, and all the terrible things that you go through as a result, because you're not allowed to speak about this stuff. You can speak about being a recovered alcoholic or a drug addict or any number of things, or even gone to jail, and you've recovered from that, and you put your life on a better course, and you got a good job, and people are patting you on the back and saying how wonderful. But if you bring this subject up and say that, I had something happen to me I can't explain, and had involved unknown human intelligence, as I say in my film, they want to stone you to death. So I want to do a film that addresses that. And I can't wait to work with Jocelyn. Jocelyn Wright is her name, correct, Bill? Jill? There goes my nose again. I did turn my phone off this time. So that's what's going on. And of course, tomorrow night we have tomorrow's show, which I barely got done in time. We're going to have Joe Stillwell. He tells an amazing encounter that he had. There's 3 encounters, and we're doing it in 3 episodes. Those will be 1, 2, and 3. The first one is his first encounter, which is what happened to him is unusual, kind of the same as what we've all experienced, but different. And I think you'll find it fascinating. This is his book, which is on Amazon. It's a very short little book, and very, very well written, and he's very detail oriented. I mean, he remembered every single thing that happened to him in detail. In fact, when we put him in front of the camera, we shot for 2 hours, and I've had to go in there and cut down the length. Next week's is where he actually has the encounter with the creature, as he calls it, in his bedroom. And that one's an hour long, and I have to edit it down because he goes into so much detail that it would be very difficult to have a piece that long and have people actually watch it. It's a shame, but all the rest of the detail that you might want to know about this man is in his book, and I highly recommend it. So without further ado, we have Simon Bown here with us, and I met Simon because he asked me to be on his podcast, and I was very impressed with his podcast and with him, and he does some amazing work, both in the paranormal and UFO and alien encounters. And he himself had an encounter while driving home one night, which I hope he'll share with us. So let's bring Simon on. Simon, thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Steve. It's good to talk to you again.
Yeah, it is. We had a good time, and I really appreciate you reading. And if you haven't listened to it, it's in the community section. There's a clip up. He read 10 minutes of my book. He read my book, and then he decided to have me on his show after reading the book because he enjoyed it, to talk about the book and my experiences. So, and I really thank you for that. And that podcast is also in the community section, and I highly recommend his podcast. It's excellent. So how did you get started doing this?
The podcasting? Well, I had a commute for work that was an hour and 15 minutes to get there and the same coming back. So it was 2.5 hours a day I was in the car, and I just started listening to all these podcasts, and I was looking for paranormal stuff because I've been interested in it my whole life, and I've had all these experiences myself. But I'm also a musician, and so I got to the point where it was almost like scratching a creative itch to see if I could do a podcast myself. And because I've been recording at home so much, I knew how to use the recording software. That side of it wasn't a problem. And I started emailing people and say, would you be a guest on my podcast? And I was surprised so many of them said yes, just about all of them. Now I've got to the point, I've done over 300 episodes
Wow.
of this, Our Paranormal Afterlife, and over 100 episodes of the Alien UFO podcast.
Wow.
And it's been a real education, and it's, I love doing it.
I can tell. Oh, and Simon, if you hear this bell, which comes up sometimes, it's not meant to be rude, but that's when someone actually supports us and gives us a super sticker on YouTube. We always ring the bell and thank them. So just so you know.
It's not like I'm talking too much.
No. This is all about you and about your work. So can you tell us about your work? Because besides doing the podcasts, you do other work, don't you?
Yeah.
The paranormal?
Clinical hypnotherapist, and as I got a diploma in clinical hypnotherapy. I specialize in taking people through regression, mostly past life regression. But I have 2 or 3 people have come to me regarding ET contact experiences that they think they might have had, and they want to examine it and just find out if did it really happen. And I feel like I'm okay doing that. I think you need a lot of training and a lot of understanding of the phenomenon. And because I've read so many books right back from the 70s, and I've done hundreds of past life regressions, I know how to do a regression. I know how to handle when somebody has a traumatic experience in the past and how to deal with that and help them through it, or just take them away from it completely. So I've started doing that, and it's amazing what comes up. And I have had a small number of people who've gone to past lives on other planets. And it's interesting because it kind of reminded me that we live on this planet, we live on Earth, we're all very Earth-centric, and this is where it all happens. And people think about reincarnation and past lives, and it's all human. But actually, the universe is enormous, and there's billions of galaxies with billions of planets. And it seems like there is life everywhere. And so it stopped me being so human-centric in a way, and viewing the universe as somewhere we could all go or have been spiritually. I mean, I'm not religious, so I don't like using words like soul or God or things like that, because that comes with a lot of baggage.
But we do have a spirit.
Yeah. And it starts getting complicated when you start really examining it about how it might work. And I don't say that I have any of the answers, But it's like I've got tons of information when you can have a good guess at what might be happening.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you want me to go into it, reincarnation and how it works with your spirit or your soul and how complicated it can get.
Yes. I mean,
Well,
you could go into it a bit. I'm sure everyone would love to hear what you've learned, and it must be amazing to be working with people, and if they do get panicked, and because some of the things can be quite traumatic, it must be unnerving for you, certainly when you first started. I mean, I know you probably ran into a lot of people who had memories of past lives in World War II, because this is relatively recent and fresh for a lot of us. Because I know I, without being regressed, have very strong memories of World War II, and it was very traumatic.
Yeah, I did a past life regression with a woman, and we went back in time to just the point where we enter the past life. And
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much.
and
10 pounds or euros.
excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we entered the past life, and I said, "So, okay, where are you? What's happening?" And she said, "I'm watching the naked women and children walk into the gas chamber." And I thought, uh-oh, this isn't good. And I said, "If you look down at yourself, can you see what you're wearing or who you are?" She says, "I'm a man and I'm wearing a German uniform."
Oh boy.
And she was, a little upset about this. So we moved away from that quite quickly.
I can understand that.
But there's an idea with past life regression that the past life you see and what you see in that past life is chosen for you by your spirit guides and your higher self, and they'll choose for you what is beneficial for you to see. So when we get into that scene, that's in the back of my mind. It's like, how is this beneficial? Why are they showing us this? So I don't want to just run away from it immediately if the spirit guides have picked it for a reason. But we did move away quite quickly because she was upset, and I thought this I don't know where this is going to go. And because we do it as past life regression therapy, she had a particular therapeutic target that we were looking for, and I didn't see that it could have anything to do with what we were seeing there. So it's good to move away from that and then try and get into that space to find what maybe in a past life is coming through and affecting you in your current life, and then we can relieve it in some way. There's different techniques.
You did have a question down there that went along with that ringing of the bell and the 10 euros that was directed at you, Simon.
If there are more lives than we have lived before this life that we are living, why can't we remember those previous lives? It's the thing where your soul will have these lives to learn a lesson. And there's a specific reason. This is what I'm gathering, as I said, it's all informed guesswork. And so you might come into this life and your lesson is to learn about, let's say, rejection. I've done 3 past life regressions where I've seen lives where I've been rejected. So you're living the life, but if you realize you've got all those other past lives, which indicates there is an afterlife, you perhaps might not take this life so seriously, and this lesson won't be so intense for you, and your soul won't learn what it really sets out to learn. So knowing all your past lives wouldn't be useful. And I have had a point in a past life regression where I took somebody into the space between lives, a spiritual kind of space. And one of their spirit guides came forward and said to them, "Look, I'm not going to talk to you. If I helped you out right now with this past life regression, you wouldn't learn your lesson. And ultimately, that would be bad for you. So I'm not talking to you." And they just turned around and walked off. And other times, in most of my sessions that I do, we get to that space where the spirit guide is, and we can have a conversation with them and ask them all sorts of questions. It can be really interesting and insightful and healing. and useful for the client, which is why I always try and get into that space. But other things do show up in that space as well, and I don't control any of it. I don't know what's going to turn up. I've had people say pets have shown up, or deceased loved ones, like their grandmother, their grandfather, their mother. There was one woman recently, she was taken to a space where there were 8 beings there that she kind of said they were like in the shape of a human, but they were just light. It's like how you might imagine your spirit to be. But there were a
Hmm.
couple there that weren't human, odd shaped sort of guys. And I'm reminded of another one that made me laugh. We took someone and they got into this space. They call it the Council of Elders, and they're the elder spirit guides. And one of them was an ET, and I asked her about what did they look like, and it didn't sound like like the Nordics, the Greys, the
Hmm.
reptilians, or like the mantis beings. And we asked it, have you had a life on Earth? Have you incarnated as a human? And the alien's response was kind of, how dare you? I wouldn't lower myself to have a life on Earth. But it was an interesting point of view. But there's all sorts of reasons why you might not remember your previous lives,
Hmm.
and most of the time it's not useful. And when we do a past life regression, I've often wondered, are we interfering here? Should we really be looking at these past lives? But then on the other side of it, the spirit guides are showing you this past life. So if it was to interfere, they wouldn't show you. There may
Wow.
be something that's bleeding through from a past life that is not useful and is interfering. And so by doing the past life regression, we can clear that. And there's I've had people with physical ailments that have been partly healed, and there's a lot of emotional stuff that disappears. And just as an example, there was a woman that came to me for some kind of therapy. What she didn't tell me was that she had bad eczema on one of her legs. And we went to this past life, and she was this man in a forest, and these big bear trap, the claws of a bear trap grabbed her leg. And she emailed me afterwards, a couple of weeks later, and said that that bear trap grabbed her leg exactly the same place as her eczema. And now the eczema's cleared up. And she was in her 50s, and she tried her whole life to clear up this eczema. All the doctors and lotions and potions, nothing could shift it. But 2 weeks after that past life regression, it was gone. And it seems like something from that injury for the bear trap might have caused it.
It was
It's
in her spirit somehow, and it was actually interacting with her physiology in that
yeah,
location, as though that vibration in that part of her spiritual body was causing it. And I've heard this before, um, that this is possible, but it must have been it's been fascinating hearing from you, Simon, that uh, the spirit guides are involved. Um, this
yeah,
is very much in keeping with the indigenous people's beliefs, and but I've never heard anyone that does your work speak of it quite that way, and it really makes sense for some reason. It just seems natural and correct.
yeah. I see it as just part of nature. If we have an
Hmm.
afterlife, it's not something really religious in a way. And there are some skeptics who say, well, we can't explain near-death experiences now and children with past life memories, but one day science will explain it, and then that'll be it. It'll be sorted. And I think,
Right.
well, what if they discover the explanation, and that is there is an afterlife, and we do have reincarnation?
They hope to explain it away. They're pretty good at that,
Yeah, yeah,
but they
and
really don't know.
no, and then it's like with UFOs, alien abduction, that there seems to be people who have never studied it, know nothing about it, but they know better than you, who's had these experiences their whole life and read many books and met so many people who've had these experiences. But that you're clearly wrong, and they know better, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, that's true. We run into it all the time, and It never gets easy to deal with. I mean, I just tend to ignore it now, but back in the day, back in the 90s especially, it got nasty, because it was an emotional thing, being attacked. And I was on many talk shows, and they'd always have Michael Shermer there, and he would always take me on, and the others that were on camera on major, national talk shows, and just it was hard.
Did you ever get ambushed? Did you ever turn up at the TV show and say, "Hang on, what's this guy doing here?" And then he's this famous skeptic or something.
Oh yeah, sure. But it was almost always Michael Shermer, who's basically the head of the National Skeptical Inquirer, I think it's called, and he's actually a very pleasant human being off camera, and because I had dinner with him, and um, but that's his job, and that's what he does, and it was kind of, you're not supposed to take it personally. It's just who I am and what I do, and you are who you are and what you do. And I said, well,
Yeah.
it kind of helped, but they're there. And there's like three of them. There's James Oberg, who's still with us and for NASA, but he's okay with me, because he'll say, well, I think Barney and Betty Hill saw that episode of The Twilight Zone, and the one where they had the guys they abduct the guy, and they kind of have black eyes, and that kind of thing. And he says they saw that, and that's what influenced them. But then he'd kind of look around and say, but I don't really know. He'd always say that, and that's okay. I hardly think that that's what did that. Okay, I'm going to try to ring the bell a little bit lighter. Robert, thank you. It upset one of the people here, so that I rang the bell.
I feel this idea, with Betty and Barney Hill, and this goes for a lot of other people as well. They say they saw that episode of The Twilight Zone, and so that explains it away in some way. But then you think, well, if that affected them like that, how come it didn't affect anybody else like that?
Yeah, and how
then,
come it affected them so much that they had physical evidence and circular marks and radiation on their car, and there's just all this other stuff that the Barney's shoes. I mean, if you know the case, and I'm sure you do, right down to the map that she recalled, and how later on that astrophysicist, she figured out by building the physical map of the stars, and she actually located the grouping of stars as being part of the Zeta Reticuli system. And of course, that's where the Zeta Reticulas were born. But Barney and Betty Hill, and also the beings, never said that they were from Zeta Reticula. They just said, if you don't know where you are on the map, there's no point in me telling you where you are on the map. And that is so classic of interactions with the visitors. Oops, sorry.
Yeah. So. And it's a criticism of skeptics as well, about how they say people who have these abduction experiences see the greys because the greys are in like popular culture so much, and we see that face everywhere. But where did that face come from? I think Betty Andreasson saw it in the 80s, and
yes,
Whitley
Betty Andreasson. Yeah, and then in the 90s, I started, actually before that, in the late 80s, I started doing sketches of what I knew, and they became so prolific that everyone from X-Files to High Times, the magazine, and many other magazines and TV shows and Sightings all started using my work, and that really put that particular type of gray with the the head shaped like that, and the big wraparound eyes and everything, and that really put that image on the map. And I was very much behind that. Plus I did comic books for Whitley Strieber and everything else. So I want to thank Mark Ware. Thank you very much, Mark. It's really sweet of you. Thank you so much. It really helps. Yeah, I lost track, but we were talking about the origins of the Greys and how that image got spread around. And it did start with Barney and Betty Hill, and but it also goes back even further if you consider the Aborigine people and the Wangina drawings that they did back thousands of years ago, which looked just like them. So
And
So
those cave paintings.
yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah. So
so what are you working on now? I mean, you're still continuing to work with clients doing regressions, and you did talk about how some of them actually felt that they had lives on other worlds. That would be interesting to hear about. I'm sure our listeners would, our community would love to do that. And I wish I had a tissue handy, Mary. I have allergies, and every time I do this show, they flare up.
uh,
I don't know why.
well, I took a lady. She was a client, and when we go back into the past life, I never know what's going to show up. I don't direct them there
Sure,
or anything.
sure.
We get we get to a point in the hypnotic induction where I say, "Okay, now you step into the past life," and I say, "Okay, where are you? What do you see?" And she was saying, "Well, I'm in a desert, and I can't see any buildings around me." And I said, "Okay,
Oh,
if you look down, can you see what you're wearing?" And she was just quiet. And I said, "Do you get an image of yourself?" And she said, "I don't think I'm human. I've got too many knees." And we tried to move away from that space and move on from that, but it just didn't happen. And in the end, I used another technique to move, and we just jumped into another human past life. And there was a guy who said that the life that he went to was kind of like aquatic. He said they were kind of like dolphins or whales.
huh.
They're very intelligent, and almost the whole planet was water. And there were these much bigger creatures. They were the same species as him, but they were much bigger. And there was this kind of psychic thing happening amongst them. And these older, huge ones were kind of hubs. It's almost like when you've
Huh.
got a network in a building, these guys are the routers or the switches. And
Wow.
he said that he was being trained up to take over the place of one of them when he gets old enough, and that they send emotion around the planet, and they're trying to send positivity. And he would move into that role and eventually would die. And that this life on Earth was the first one he'd ever had. And that previous life was training to move to this planet to so he could contain some positivity, because
Wow.
this planet is so negative.
Wow. This is fantastic to hear. I mean, what I'm getting to is I'm actually seeing it in my mind. This water world and these beings is that they're probably not even technological and don't need to be, but yet they're highly intelligent. There's probably many worlds out there um, that they're in this state of being where they're not necessarily technological, but they're highly psychic and they can connect with the rest of the universe better than we can. But yet they live in a world covered in water. I mean, this is how different things can be once we get out there and start exploring. I'm hoping we do one day. So, second
Yeah,
floor to the right and straight on to morning.
it's that thing of travel, though. It's like one of the skeptics arguments is they say it couldn't possibly be aliens here because it takes so long to travel between the stars. And it's almost like they're saying the human science has reached the absolute peak, and we know physics, astrophysics, quantum physics
Oh yeah,
inside
sure we
out,
do.
and we know absolutely that no one could travel faster than the speed of light, and that's just nonsense.
It is nonsense, and they're still doing that in spite of James Webb's telescope and the impossible things it's discovering. And some of the scientists are saying, well, maybe it's sending us back false data. Well, geez, you guys need to think outside the box.
Yeah,
You really
yeah,
do, because you know, as you well know, Simon, the universe is very, very old, and we're just a blink in the eye in its calendar. And I always loved Carl Sagan for that calendar, the cosmic calendar. Um, and it's true. So, for millions, billions of years before us, there have been probably other I don't, probably there've been other civilizations and they became technological and they would have easily found our planet
Yeah,
and
and it,
had the ability to get here. As you know, I mean, just the other 2 weeks ago, NASA's scientists discovered that they can make an engine that produces one Earth gravity and it doesn't need any form of propulsion and will defy gravity. Now we haven't heard anything about it since then, which is typical. But you know, if we're discovering that now, or maybe we're just revealing something we've always known about, I'm not sure which, then we'll be able to leave the solar system in less than 100 years, maybe even sooner. Maybe we've already done it and we're not even being told we've done it. So that's just, you're right. It's just bollock.
and I wonder if they find us. I'm talking about the ETs,
Right.
not through how we would find them, but maybe it's something to do with telepathy or something spiritual. You know, because they do seem to be telepathic, and maybe the Earth is a massive beacon in the telepathic kind of ether. You know, how can I
Yes.
can't
No, I
find the
know what you're
words.
trying to describe. Absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe that's how they find us.
But they do, some of them do have technology and they have Webb telescopes, and Webb telescope is discovering planets that have life on them right now. They're just not telling us about it, or they will, and then they retract it. And oops, we had a flying saucer crash at Roswell. Nope, it was a weather balloon. This behavior just continues. But that telescope is able to detect industrialization and light that's artificial on nearby worlds.
Yeah, I did read recently they were saying there's a planet that has something in the atmosphere that
Mm-hmm.
on Earth is only produced by life.
Right.
And they're kind of saying, "Oh, well, you know, maybe if something else is producing it." They
Yeah.
always like to cover their backs, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
It's
Yep.
like the Viking landers in the 70s. I think they were so far apart, thousands of miles apart on Mars. They both did an experiment which showed it's probably life. And the scientists who ran those experiments said, "This is it. We found life on Mars."
I
And
remember.
then the higher ups at NASA said, "No, no, no, it's not life." But I think those scientists went to the grave saying, "No, we found life on Mars. Two Viking landers, thousands of miles apart, same results of the experiment. Can't be that the instrumentation is faulty."
Yep. I know. I think it's all about keeping us in our box.
Yeah, I think a lot of scientists don't know, isn't it? There's compartmentalization and all that kind of thing going on, like in the military. But we could talk for hours about this and speculate and get into all sorts
Sure.
of conspiracy theories and things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can. And after the show that I did with you, we stayed on and talked a bit more. And you talked about that night you were driving home and you saw the light in the field. Is my memory correct?
Yeah, yeah, and it's something I always try and describe it the same way over the years. So I never embellish it or exaggerate. It's always the same description.
Because you remember it. You
Yeah,
don't
and
forget something like that.
yeah, yeah. Which I was driving home one night. I'd been gigging with my band in this town west of London, and so it was about 1 a.m. on a Monday morning from this Sunday night gig, and the whole motorway was empty, which was odd. And I'm coming into London, and off to the head ahead of me on the left hand side, because we drive on the left, there was a lot of light coming from this field. And I would drive this route often, so I knew there was no buildings in that field, and it was really bright, but I couldn't quite see it yet because the trees are in the way. And so I slowed down really slow to like 5 miles an hour as I was getting right to that point. And I moved past the trees, and then there was this craft there about the size of a large house and shaped like a rugby ball. And it was just above the trees. It didn't move an inch the whole time. And it was maybe 200 feet from me, covered in lots and lots of red pin spot lights on one half of the bottom of it. And then coming out of the other end was a really powerful spotlight pointing at the ground. I mean, it was almost like it had a pole attached to it that was illuminated. It was such a bright light. And so I'm driving really slowly. I'm leaning forward, looking up at it out of my windscreen. And you do the kind of mental checklist where you think, well, it's definitely not an aeroplane. It can't be a helicopter because helicopters make a lot of noise. And it's not a hot air balloon. And you just can't work out what it is. And then I just kind of got out of sight and I speeded up and went home, which I think is a little odd because I was so much into UFOs to
And you
just
didn't stick
then
around
say, yeah, just kind
it
of,
is
okay.
odd.
And it's one of those things that I hear now and then from people who have these encounters that perhaps they switch something off inside you that, like, people might just not think to take a picture. They may have their phone with them, or
Correct. That's correct.
a long time ago, before phones, people might have had a camera in the car. It doesn't occur to them to pick up the camera. I did talk to one woman who she said she had a camera on the back seat of the car and she started reaching back for it. And then something in her just was like, stop. And she
You don't
just,
need to do that. Yeah.
yeah. And she said it wasn't like she had a voice in her head, like telepathy telling her to stop. There was just something came over her that was, oh, I'm not going to do that,
Yeah.
which was quite odd. But after I saw that craft, when I got home, I checked the clock because, I'm aware of this missing time thing
I was just going to
for
ask you about that.
from
You
seeing
didn't
the
make an
UFOs.
X on the road.
Yeah. But I wonder if I saw it because they wanted me to see it. And this is something I wonder about sightings, that perhaps they're doing it for a reason, and we're all on a path. We might call it a spiritual path or some
Mhm.
kind of path, and they're giving you the next step, or they're giving you a bit of a kick to say, look, pay attention, because I do these podcasts and they go out to all these people, and I've made so many of them. And I wonder if that's what they wanted me to do. They led me along this path to get to this point where I'm a communicator with this information. And I talked to Mike Cleland about that. I'm not sure if you know him, but he's written this book, UFOs and Owls.
Oh,
It's a
yes,
very
yes.
good
We had
book.
him on the show. I was thinking, his name sounds familiar. Oh, yeah, we had him on the show. He was terrific.
Yeah, he's a really thoughtful guy, but
He is.
something I said to him, do you think that maybe they've been leading you down this path because they wanted you to write this book, to be this communicator? And because that's not the only time I've seen a UFO. I tell you this other story where, again, I'm driving, again, there's a gig, and this time I'm on my way to the gig, and I live in the South Coast now, not in London, and I have to go across this area called the National Forest, and it's a national forest. It's called the New Forest, which is a bit ironic because there's not a lot of trees there. But because it's a national forest, it's protected land, and they have these little roads that have got enough width for one car, and you can drive round, and you'll come around a corner, and the road will be covered in horses or sheep or something, and they just roam the land, and they don't let you do anything there. You definitely couldn't set up like I don't know, a rave with loads of music going, or lights, or have bonfires or parties. And I'm saying that because I saw a massive light there. But I was driving on this dual carriageway, and it was nighttime. It was 7 p.m. and the sun went down like 5 because it was winter. And I looked off to my right, and there was this ball of orange light about the size of a car, half a mile off the side of the carriageway. So I'm driving along and I'm looking to the side and I'm looking back at the road and I'm looking to the side because there's all these other cars. And it was just above a tree and it didn't move an inch the whole time. And it was really bright. And I was looking at it and thinking, but this is a national forest. There's no way you'd be allowed to set up a spotlight that big. And also it's pointing right at us. But then I
Mhm.
realized all the ground underneath it was lit up. So the light was 360 degrees from this thing. And I just kept going up this road and looking at it. And then I couldn't stop because it's just bushes on either side of the road. And there's all these other cars. So I couldn't block the road. And there's a weird synchronicity with it because I went up to this town west of London, did the gig, and I'm heading back and I'm coming back down this dual carriageway. There's maybe 2 or 3 cars. It's 2 a.m. and I'm listening to this interview with Mike Cleland, and he's saying that he woke up one night and he was living in this house that was out in the countryside, not a town or a city, and this big open field behind it. And there was this light coming in through his bedroom window, and he got up on his elbows and he looked out the window, and there's this really bright light out there and 4 greys walking towards the house.
Mm.
And he
Mhm.
heard this voice in his head say, "Now is the time to shut down and go to sleep." So he
Yep.
just put his head back on the pillow and went to sleep. And he said to me, "What I should have done was jump out of bed and grab a baseball bat and get ready for the fight." But the thing was, he was talking to this guy, Joe Montaldo, who researches alien abduction. And Mike Cleland said, "I saw this really bright light out the back of the house." And Joe Montaldo says, "Ah, now you know what that ball of light was now, don't you?" But the thing is, Joe Montaldo said it at the exact same place where I first spotted that ball of light. And it was like he was saying that sentence to me. And I thought that was a weird synchronicity. It sent a shiver down my spine. But I think synchronicities come up a lot for people who have alien abductions,
Oh, they
because it's
do.
one of the side effects.
There will be very few people here right now in chat that'll disagree with you on that one. We're always sharing. This is a fantastic community of people who are listening to you right now. Mostly are either very, very intensely interested in the subject, but overall, a great number of them have had these experiences all their lives, or certainly been pilots that have been flying and had an encounter with one being off their wing. But everyone here has had a taste of it, and that's why they're here. And so, and we're always discussing these synchronicities, and Jill just says, "Yes, Simon."
Yeah, there's a book I read by this woman, Sharon Hawlett, I think her name is. And
Haven't heard it
it's all
before.
about synchronicities and how
Oh,
some amazing synchronicities show up that just makes you think, hang on, the universe is trying to tell me something. And I could tell you one of her synchronicities where she'd lived in France for 2 years and she had a boyfriend. Then she moved back to the States, and there was this new shopping mall close by. And she got in the car with a friend and got her phone out and got the maps up to get the map to the shopping mall. And it placed them in France. And she's in the United States. And she tried it again and again. It kept on showing this little village in France on her phone. And it was like, oh, this is odd. Do I have to use my friend's phone? And she found out later that that exact moment her ex-boyfriend was in that village in France, and that he'd never been there before or never after. And so what is that link, that synchronicity, that she would have that coming up on the maps on her phone, and he was at that exact spot at that moment?
wow.
And it's not like they got back together and you could say, oh, they were soulmates, it's the universe bringing them together. None of that. It's just that synchronicity happened to her, and she started investigating it and finding all these amazing things that happen to people. And something else that has been noticed, you've probably seen it, is that people who have near-death experiences have the same after effects as people who have alien abduction,
Mm-hmm.
where there's that thing where you can't wear mechanical watches sometimes because they just stop and they don't work, and the synchronicities. And also you might walk under a street light and the light goes out, or you
I
have
have
problems
that
with
problem.
electrics.
Yeah, I have
Yes.
that problem.
So that's interesting that they have that out of body experience, which can be very spiritual, and they have the same after effects as this alien abduction. And is there a connection there?
It's I think I've shared this story before with the community here, and in back in '78. I had this girlfriend. She lived with me that night. She stayed at a girlfriend's house. I woke up in the morning after this very powerful dream where she came to me. She's just wearing her underpants, and she just, I was in this cloud of colored light and this music in the background, and she came out at me, and to make a long story short, she shared with me a number of things, but told me how much she loved me and that she was fine and she's never felt like this before, and it's incredible. And you were right about when we pass, we continue on, because she didn't believe that. She also didn't believe that there were visitors here from other worlds, and she underlined that also was true. And I just had to share this with you, but I have to go. So I wake up in the dream around 6:30 or quarter after 6, and I had to go to a screening of one of the films that I worked on. When I got home, there were all these messages on my phone machine then that said that she had died around 6:15, 6:30 in the morning. And I found out later that she was found on the floor from a brain aneurysm with just her underwear on. The rest of her was naked. She had fallen off the couch, uh, and it just, I was sick for 2 weeks afterwards. And it so, it was like I had a near-death experience. Like, she pulled me out, my spiritual body, out of my body in my dreams, and shared that with me. And so technically I was dead with her. And I will never forget it as long as I live. And that was a real gift. That made me very sick. And I think it had something to do with my being pulled out of my body and put back in, and the whole shock of her dying. She was 24 years old. I mean, who would expect that anything like that so odd would happen? But it did. And so ever since then, I've had even more stuff, as you described. I've had that connection as a result of it. And then you add having interaction with visitors, non-human intelligence on top of that. And, I have a real mix of those abilities as a result, I guess.
Yeah, that's a shared death experience.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
have you heard in your work anything like that before? A shared near death experience?
Yeah, there's a guy, I think his name's William Peters. He's got a website about this side of things, and there's a thing called Deathbed Visions as well, where people, it's like somebody dies and they go along with them in the first stage of their death. They go into the light, so to speak. And there was a guy, I've interviewed both of these guys. One of them, he'd been in a car accident where his wife and son died, and he woke up in the hospital bed, these terrible injuries, and his wife and child sort of came down. They were floating above him, and she was saying, "It's not your fault. You shouldn't worry about all this." And the nurse and the doctor saw them as well. So it wasn't just him
Wow.
having that experience. And so
Wow.
I interviewed the doctor as well as interviewing the guy in the bed. And the doctor's gone on to kind of really investigate all this stuff. And this thing with deathbed visions has been around for such a long time. That phrase comes from a book called Deathbed Visions, which was published in 1925 and was written
Wow.
by a guy who was the professor of physics at the University of Dublin. And he was knighted by King George V in 1912. So he was a proper kind of scientist studying this. It wasn't like he was woo-woo or something, back in 1900. And he formed the Society for Psychical Research.
Which is still with us today.
Yeah. And so also it makes me kind of wonder, if they knew about that phenomenon 100 years ago, why hasn't it informed society that there's stuff like this going on? If you talk about people in the street about deathbed visions, they wouldn't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, they seem to hold all this stuff back. It's like the scientists catch wind of it, and it's like, oh, we just can't go there. Why? Why can't you go there? I don't understand the reasoning behind it. Other than maybe they want us most of the people to remain on the blue pill. I don't know. But, this group here is certainly the red pill group for sure. And I don't know. I've never heard of that until you told me just now. Again, it's one of these situations where I thought maybe that only happened to me. you know, because my mother, when her grandmother died, um, it was classic. Her grandmother woke her up in bed at night and was sitting on the edge of the bed and said how much I love you, and I've got to go. I have to leave, and I just want you to know I love you. And then my mom said it was really weird. She thought she was awake, but then she woke up startled because the phone was ringing in the hallway, and she could hear my grandmother, her mother, on the phone breaking down and crying. And she came into the bedroom and said, "Marianne, your grandmother just died."
Yeah.
So it tends to run in families, it seems too. But you know that's a very classic case, I think.
Yeah. I talked to a guy the other day. It's funny you should say that because he had a dream about somebody coming to him and saying everything's okay, don't worry about it. But he was woken up by the phone ringing, and he picked up the phone, and it was just static. And it was weird. He said that the phone would ring exactly as that dream was ending, and then it was just static on the line. And how often do you get a call that's just static? And there is a book called Phone Calls from the Dead
Huh.
that talks about this kind of thing. And I interviewed a woman who had WhatsApps from the dead, apparently, which was uh, which was very interesting about how these messages come through, and it's or just loads of random numbers and letters. But then in the middle of it, it says, "Darling, it's me." And then there's other messages started coming through, and she realized they were coming through from a mobile phone of a medium. And she asked the medium, "Are you sending these messages?" And the medium's like, "No, I don't know anything about this." And they checked her WhatsApp, and her WhatsApp didn't have the messages being sent. She didn't have this woman's number. But it's interesting it was coming from a medium. It's like the medium has got that spiritual connection that could be a channel to get through to send the WhatsApps.
Wow.
It's all guesswork.
It is. But I don't know. When you see so many cases, and you know that most of these individuals have never talked to each other before, and yet they're experiencing the same things over and over again, and it's like a pattern. And I think it needs to be understood. I think it needs to be given attention. Clearly, there's something going on there. There really is. And
Yeah.
Arthur, I agree with you about the dog. I'm looking at the comments over here. So, Simon, you've done a great deal of work in this area. I mean, you're very well read. You know a great deal about. It's very broad in the paranormal, and somewhat focused on the afterlife and past lives. Um, have you ever thought about putting a book together? Because you have a lot of data, a lot of things that you could share with people and kind of pull all that information together in one place. Um, I know
Yeah.
it's something I would love to read because just the things you're sharing with us tonight are just are really something. I mean, they're really
Well, I'm particularly interested in like where could there be proof? Is there evidence that's really solid? There seems to be that with children with past life memories and their
sure
birthmarks and birth defects. But I'm writing a book at the moment about near death
good.
experiences and the verifiable things that happen. And I'm doing each chapter is a different person, and I'm probably going to do 50 people, and every single one of them saw something when they were out of body that was later verified. And they could say to the person, "You couldn't possibly have seen that. You were dead. Your heart had stopped. Your brain was flatlined. How could you know what your sister was doing 7 miles away?" And she can be this woman was very specific about it, talking about she was with her brother and he was at a petrol station getting some gas for his car, and he was sent a quick WhatsApp message to his sister to say, "I'll be with you soon and we can get to the hospital." So they knew the date and time that the message was sent, and they could link that up and to verify all this. And so she said that it's weird. their near-death experiences. She was with her brother and her sister at the same time, and she could see both of them, and it didn't seem weird or overwhelming at all. But she talked to them later, and she said she would drive them mad because she would go over it, and they say, yes, it happened exactly as you described it. And that's just one of 50 cases just like that.
Right. And
And
of course, there's the one with when they're in an operation and they die on the table, and they can describe exactly what the doctors were doing, and it absolutely blows the doctors' minds. There's no way you could have known that. You were out. You were dead.
yeah, and I talked to one woman, she's in the book. She talked to her surgeon about it, and she said he clenched his fists and got all red, and then just said, "I'm not going to listen to any more of this nonsense," and he stormed out the room. He
Huh.
just couldn't handle it. But
No, he
then,
couldn't. It's so sad. I mean, it just, why are they so afraid?
yeah, and the nurses, they came like, "Tell us what happened. What did you see?" And
Yeah.
I get the impression that nurses get a lot more information on this than doctors. And it might be because they're with the patients a lot more, but it also seems they're more open-minded.
And they run into this so often, and they just don't talk about it. And a lot of people, um, when this happens to them, sometimes they'll see entities, visitors, even the Greys, in the same instance, which is
Yeah,
also common.
that was happened with Whitney Strieber, didn't it? It was
It's
in his
happened
log
with a lot of
cabin.
people. Yeah. When I had that her name was Judy, my girlfriend, and when that happened to me, I had a sense that there were other people there, or there were beings there when that happened. I really did, strongly, but I can't say that I saw them. And the realm, I call it a realm because I can still see it clearly in my mind. It was this, I was free fall, and I was like in this sphere of colored clouds, and they were slowly moving, and I could hear this music, like a meditation music, very ambient and beautiful. And the feeling I had when I was there was absolutely no pain, no sensation of discomfort. I just felt, I can't describe how I felt. It was wonderful, but and then she just came out of that fog of those clouds, that colored light, and it was one of the most. I mean, I've had lots of amazing paranormal experiences, but that one really is a hallmark in my life. So, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard about that too. I'm not the first person to tell you something like this. So,
Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of people who've had near-death experiences and people that research it as well. And there's a lot of scientists or PhDs are taking notice of it, particularly at the University of Virginia, where they've got a group called the Division of Perceptual Studies, where they research children with past life memories and near-death experiences. And so there are some people who are really looking into it, and I think they have a clash with the mainstream science. I was
of
looking at
course they do. They always do.
I was looking at a website called WebMD, which I think is quite influential, quite a big site. And they had this thing about near-death experiences, and I read it, and they said there's not been one near-death experience where verifiable information has come back. And I'm thinking, I'm writing a book with 50 of them.
Yeah.
How can you get it so wrong?
Well, I'm sure you watched the Netflix series Surviving Death, and
Yeah,
I mean, how did that child know the name, first and last name, and where they lived, and he was shown the photographs. It's like, did you live here, or would point out where you lived, and it was always the correct one over and over again. There's coincidence again. How many times can you have a coincidence or a good guess? That child seemed to know absolutely its former parents, its former name, its murder, where it lived, and everything. And so why doesn't science take that on? I mean, clearly there's something to that. And then there's, of course, the boy that we all know about that remembers World War II, where his plane went down, and the name of the people he was with on the aircraft carrier and everything. Again, I mean, how? And you've got 50 of them.
Yeah,
It's
I've
not
got
just
another
one
book
book,
here.
you know,
Yeah,
that's
I'll show you this book I've got.
this is going to be a great book.
This is called. This is by Dr. Ian Stevenson, called "Where Reincarnation and Biology Intersect," and this has got 100 cases of children who have birth defects that relate to the previous life, and it's like he could go
Wow.
back. I'll just show you this. He could go back to the autopsy and look at how the guy died from a bullet
Thank
wound,
you, George. It's okay. Show
and
it again, please.
and so the child has got a
Wow.
birthmark here and a
Right.
birthmark here, exactly the same place as the entry and exit of the bullet. And the kid remembers all this stuff about this past life. And there's loads of pictures here of birth defects. There's another one.
See, this is another. I have not heard this or been made privy to this before, and
This
it blows my mind how much work has been done.
You see this one here.
Right.
This kid remembers being tied up and being executed. They were a Japanese soldier that was captured in the war, and that's how that child died. And the mother was saying if you could have looked really closely at the skin, you could see all the little strands of the rope amongst the skin, as though the pressure was still there. And I'm just looking for one last
It's like
photo
it's
to show you.
ingrained in the spiritual body,
Yeah, so there's this kid
which is
here.
pretty terrifying.
He's Burmese,
Hmm.
and he's with Dr. Ian Stevenson's interpreter. So they've both got the same ethnic background, should have the same color skin and what have you. But this kid remembers a past life where he was a United States bomber pilot in the Second World War, and his plane crashed in Burma. And it's a pity this isn't color, but his skin is so much lighter. He had blue eyes, blonde hair. None of his family are like that. And it's like he's brought
Wow.
those traits with him from the previous life.
Wow.
So, yeah, so there's 100 cases like this in this book.
100, and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah,
Because there's so
yeah,
many people out there that are afraid to come forward um and share this with us because of the ridicule and the stigma that's been deliberately put in place to keep this kind of information down and away from the public and away from scientists. And of course, the scientists, probably most of them, face trouble if they delve into this too much, and we've seen that happen. But some of them have been bold enough to say, "I don't care," and we're going to do it anyway. So
yeah. Because Professor John Mack really went into it, didn't he? He had trouble with
yes,
Harvard when he was doing that.
Mike, thank you so much. We really appreciate the support. It really helps keep this all moving forward. Wow, what an amazing hour! We need to have you on again.
Oh, I've got so much more to talk about. I've done 400 1-hour interviews, so I could talk for hours about this stuff.
Wow, and so we should have a link to where people can go and listen to your podcasts. Is that something you can type in, or can I go find it and put it up here? I should have had that up all along.
Well, there's Our Paranormal Afterlife. That podcast's on Apple and Spotify and all sorts
It's
of
all over
places.
the place. I saw,
Yeah, and the Alien UFO podcast is my other podcast,
right.
and I try to get that everywhere as well. So that'll be on Apple and Spotify and all these places. And my website is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk. And yeah, I've got a link to the podcast site from that site where there's all the hypnosis stuff.
If you could send me that again in an email, I'd like to put that in the community section so people will be able to go there and look. So
Yeah.
And of course, we're gonna want to keep up on your progress with your book, because this is just amazing, fascinating stuff, Simon.
Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, we really appreciate you sharing you had 2 encounters. I mean, you had 2 sightings.
Yeah, I've got another thing that came up when I was hypnotized, but I don't know if you
Okay.
have time for that.
We got a moment for it.
Okay, I'm gonna go sit down again.
I'm sure everybody here would love to hear it.
Well, I was being taken through a past life regression. I've been taken through a few, and I saw this past life where it looked like it was 16th century Venice, and the person, the previous life, was just after their death. And I seemed to be a ball of light myself, hovering over the body, looking down on it. And the hypnotherapist would say to me, okay, just go away, leave that life behind, just drift away. You're moving up and away from that life, leave it behind. So tell me, what do you see next? What's the first thing that comes to you? And it was like somebody flicked a switch, and I went from 0 to 100, and I was terrified. And there was no build up to it. And the hypnotherapist said to me afterwards, she could see all my muscles quivering because I was so scared. And I didn't want to tell her what I saw at first, which was that I was on this table with these greys around me, and I was naked, and they were sort of going about their business, methodically doing stuff to me. And it was this thing where I kind of remember it was almost like a silence in that room, but I could hear their feet shuffling in a way or something. And they brought this contraption over me and did something to me. And I recognized that this was a time when I was living in London. I knew what the time period was for this. And then they got me up off the bed, and I had a grey either side of me. And then I had this vision come to my mind where I was in this forest, and a load of trees are being cleared. And there was a planet up in the sky, and it was much closer than the moon. And this couldn't have been real, because the gravitational forces and magnetic field of the Earth and that planet would have interfered with each other too much. But there was this pathway coming from the other planet to where I was standing, and I was with all these other adults. I'm coming down the pathway with all these children just in white, and the adults were greeting them and hugging them, and it looked so happy. And I had this message in my mind. Sorry. And it said, when the planets meet, the children will return. And I said that to the hypnotherapist, and she said, oh, that sounds all very positive. And I just said, no, there's something wrong. And I don't know where that came from, but for me, it felt very strong to say, no, there's something wrong here. But then the next thing I knew, I was standing back in that room with a grey either side of me, and a hole opened up in the wall in front of me. And it just kind of opened up. There wasn't a doorway or something. And it was weird because it was a cookie cutter shape of me, you know, I could fit exactly into it, my arms and legs. And I went through that, and it wasn't into a corridor or another room. It was just this space of light, a multicolored space, which reminded me of what you were saying earlier about. And I was shooting through it like 100 miles an hour. And I got the impression there were other people in there with me. And we all came and converged in this white room. And it was long and thin, almost like a train carriage. But it was completely white inside. And there were these seats on the side that were kind of coming out of the wall. They weren't.
Walls, yes.
They weren't individual seats. And there were clothes scattered everywhere, and 2 greys at the other end. And I got this message that kind of said, you're not going home till you got your clothes back on, which seemed funny to me. But at the other end where the greys were, there was a hole in the floor. And I walked over to that and went through that hole. And the next thing, I was back in my flat in London. It was 2 a.m. And I went to bed, and then I got up in the morning, went to work like nothing had happened. Didn't remember any of it. So that whole scenario, that memory came back in hypnosis. And we were doing a past life regression. It wasn't a thing I'd gone to her and said, I want to find out if I've had any ET encounters or any UFO.
You were driving down the road that night, and the freeway was empty. The
yeah. So it could be suggested, you know, hypnosis is the power of suggestion. And if you say, I want to remember meeting some ETs, that will crop up because you've suggested it. But this was past life regression. There was nothing to do with UFOs in this hypnosis. And I still look back at that and I wonder, did that really happen? Did I make that up? My subconscious, because my subconscious knows a
That's
lot
natural. Yeah,
about that stuff. But I have
that's
talked
natural.
to, like, I talked to Mike Cleland about it, and do you know Kathleen Marden
No,
and Yvonne Smith?
Vaughn, I've worked with since 1989. We're close friends. So
I think I've talked to her about it, and Kathleen Marden is Betty Hill's niece, and so she she knows a lot about this stuff. And they all said to me, "Yeah, we think it probably did happen," from what I'm saying, but I haven't heard people talk about this space of light that I was kind of shooting through.
hmm.
But I think
That
it's a
doesn't
little
mean somebody
bizarre
hasn't
here and
hit.
there.
What's that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it seems a little bizarre that this idea that there's a
The whole
cookie
thing
cutter
seems
shape of me
bizarre.
in the wall, and that I'm going through that space, and this idea you don't get home till you've got your clothes on, because there are some people who wake up and their pajamas are on backwards, aren't there?
Sure.
Or they're not wearing them and they went to bed wearing them, or they
They're
wake up in the garden.
they're real bad about putting the covers back on you too, and you wake up and you're cold. It's like you wouldn't get back into bed and just leave the covers off, and
Yeah,
they're kind of thrown off. They're not even neatly folded or anything. It's just they're pulled on one side, and sometimes your feet are hanging off the edge of the bed, and you're cold, and that's when, after all this time, when that happens to you, you realize something just happened, and you may not even remember it, but you do know that you just have that feeling inside. But that's a fantastic experience that you shared with us, and I'm very visual, and so I could see the cookie cutters of you and pass, and it's for some reason that just all makes sense to me, and
yeah.
which is crazy.
I
And
was thinking of maybe getting hypnosis to investigate it more,
right,
but then I'm a bit creeped out by it. And
well,
a
of course,
couple of weeks ago, this was just a couple of weeks ago, I woke up and there was a flash of light in the room. And I got up on my elbows and I'm looking around in the darkness, and there's this shadow figure on the other side of the room. And I'm creeped out and I'm getting scared. And then I realized it was my wife. And she just got up to go to the toilet. And that flash of light was because she opened the door and the light came through. And she was the shadow figure. She just came and got back into bed. But that really creeped me out. And I started thinking, I don't think I'm going to do this hypnosis and find out if, there's more ET contact that I've had. It's maybe I'm just a bit of a wuss, but that's how I felt about it.
no, hardly. I mean, look at your field of interest and the work, all this work you've done, and all these people you've worked with. It's fantastic, Simon.
Yeah, it's been an education. It's never get bored of it either. Still fascinated.
No, that's. I'm so glad that you reached out to have me on your show, and I was able to meet you and be aware of your work, because I think it's really important. And everyone here tonight really enjoyed it a great deal. I can tell by the comments, and they're all thanking you. We'll definitely want to have you back.
Yeah,
And please stay in touch, and I'll stay in touch, because I think this work that we're all involved in is very important. It has to do with who we are and discovering what's been kept from us. So, and it hasn't been the spirits that as a broad statement, I don't think it's them so much that want to keep it from us as much as it is that our own people who know full well that there's much more to our reality than they want to share with us. So we stay in our little box. So
yeah. Well, I'd love to come back and talk some more.
yes, we will do that for sure. So it's hard to stop talking with you about this. I've enjoyed this so much. So, and everyone else has too. So, if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask Simon at this time, if not, we will sign off, and I'll see many of you tomorrow night on the premiere show, which we have, Simon, right before our next episode. We're up to 16 episodes now, the filmed ones. And this time we have Joe Stillwell on, who is a retired fire captain, who decided back in I think 2017 or 18, maybe no, it was more recent than that. He wrote a book like a year ago about his experiences and came forward about it. And the book is a short little book. It's a good read, and even though it's in the same vein as everything we've been talking about and what other people here have experienced, it's different. It's got this little different edge to it. The being he saw, had black eyes, but it had a very different shaped head, and he's a very detailed individual. He's a very good observer, so he observed every single detail about it and could recall it perfectly. And it's really highly strange. So part 1 is on at 5 o'clock tomorrow, so we do the pre-show before then. So are we getting questions here? Oh, they're just asking what time you're in. He's in the UK, so it's very late for him right now. So but it's 1:15 in the morning, is it?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Well, I think it's time to let you go to bed, and I hope you sleep very well and your wife doesn't turn on the bright light shadows again. I've been there, done that. So again, thank you so much. And thank every one of you tonight and for being here, and your support you're wonderful, and we love you a great deal. And we'll see you tomorrow night.